The United States is hands down the wealthiest and most powerful nation on earth by a long shot. The sheer scale of America's wealth and influence is almost impossible to fully wrap your head around, even for top macroeconomists. Sure, we've got things like GDP figures, trade balances, and labor force stats to help paint a picture, but those only go so far. They're great for telling the story of your typical national economy. However, right now, it looks like the US is barreling toward what could be the most predictable economic crisis in modern history. So why is that happening? Let's dive straight in. Let's rewind a bit to the 2010s. That whole decade was marked by a serious lack of job opportunities, which in turn meant fewer chances for income growth. If you didn't feel it personally, trust me, millions of others did. The economic recovery following the 2008 financial crisis was uneven at best, with stagnant wages and a growing gap between the rich and the poor. For many Americans, especially those in lower income brackets, the 2010s were years of frustration, filled with jobs that didn't pay enough and a cost of living that kept rising. College graduates faced an unforgiving job market, and those without a degree found themselves even further behind. By the time we hit the 2020s, the government and economists were still fumbling the bag. They didn't fix anything, and in some ways, they made it worse. Instead of tackling the root causes of wage stagnation and income inequality, policymakers kicked the can down the road. Efforts to address the ballooning student debt crisis fell short, while healthcare and housing costs continued to soar. In some ways, the decade's economic scars are still visible today. We've got the same issue now, a lack of income and jobs, but with a terrifying new layer, recession. And this recession is threatening to erase what little progress we've made since 2020. The COVID-19 pandemic wiped out millions of jobs, and although some sectors have recovered, many have not. And now, just as things were starting to stabilize, we're staring down the barrel of another economic downturn. To make matters worse, there's been a massive hit to purchasing power thanks to supply chain shocks, inflation, and rising interest rates. So we're stuck with the two worst problems in economics: low income and rising prices, and it's creating a perfect storm that's brewing into something even worse than what we saw back in 2008. Back then, it was a housing market crash. This time, it's an all-encompassing squeeze that's affecting everyone, from groceries to gas to healthcare. For generations, owning a home and starting a family were the hallmarks of the American dream. But today, those dreams feel out of reach for many. Home prices have soared, and wages haven't kept up. Even those who've managed to check off the boxes, buying a home, starting a family, are still watching every dollar, trying to keep their heads above water. For millennials and Gen Zers, the dream is starting to feel more like a fantasy. Millennials and Gen Zers still want to own homes, with 62% of younger millennials and 63% of Gen Z saying homeownership is part of their dream. They see it as a symbol of stability, a sign that they've made it. But for most, the reality of actually achieving that dream seems impossible. 66% of renters feel hopeless about ever owning a home, and 72% say they simply can't afford a down payment. In fact, saving for that down payment was the hardest part of the process for 17% of homebuyers in 2022. A huge chunk of younger Americans is held back by student loan debt, with 52% saying it prevents them from saving anything at all. And get this, in 2022, a first-time homebuyer needed an income of about $95,900 to make the purchase. But to afford the monthly mortgage payments on a median-priced home, you'd need to be making almost $110,000. Meanwhile, the median household income in the US was just under $75,000 that year. So unless you had the good fortune to grow up in a wealthy neighborhood or have family help, your odds of owning a home are slim. And it's not just home ownership. Collectively, Americans owe a whopping $1.1 trillion on their credit cards. Inflation's eating away at people's purchasing power, making it harder to save or invest in long-term goals, which leaves a lot of folks feeling powerless, insecure, and even a little hopeless. Debt, for many, has replaced the income growth we used to count on. More than a quarter of Americans are doom spending, meaning they're spending money despite being worried about the economy. And that feeling of being financially discouraged is especially strong among younger adults, which makes them less likely to save for long-term goals. Instead, they're more inclined to just live in the moment. It's not all about reckless spending, though. For a lot of people, It's about wanting to enjoy life and make the most of what they have, even if buying a home or starting a family feels out of reach. But we're seeing this trend where people are spending big to chase that feeling of happiness, whether it's splurging on a Taylor Swift concert or another high-ticket experience, thinking it'll fill the gap. The current index, which shows how people are feeling about the economy right now, has been dropping like a rock since March. The decline is historic, and there's a strong connection between this drop and rising unemployment. People are not just worried about inflation or high prices anymore. They're bracing for a new wave of job losses. This fear of job insecurity is becoming more pronounced as we move into 2024. Even though we saw a tiny bump in the index in September, it wasn't nearly enough to make a real difference. This is one of the lowest points we've seen in over 40 years. And it's a clear indicator that people are losing faith in their financial futures. When Americans think 30 years down the road, many picture a country that's not exactly thriving. While just over half of the population say they're somewhat hopeful about America's future, that optimism quickly fades when they start thinking about the details. People aren't too confident about the economy, with a majority predicting it'll be weaker. They see a future where the country is drowning in debt, where the gap between the rich and the poor continues to grow wider, and where jobs that were once held by humans are increasingly being taken over by machines. If you thought Americans were feeling pretty down about their financial futures before, think again. It's way worse now. People have all but lost hope that their incomes will improve, and it's not hard to see why when you start looking at the numbers. This isn't just a temporary blip, it's a massive red flag for the future of the American economy. It's not just about a potential recession in 2024 or 2025. Nope, it's bigger than that. We're looking at short-term issues stacking on top of long-term problems, and these go back more than a decade. The cracks have been forming since the 2008 crisis, and the foundations of the economy haven't been fixed since then. When 2021 and 2022 rolled around, we were told we were in a recovery. Spoiler alert, we weren't. What we experienced was more like a price illusion. Supply chain disruptions and government stimulus checks made it look like things were bouncing back. But the reality was much darker. Volume growth was nowhere near where it needed to be, and all we really got was inflated prices and a temporary boost in spending power. You might think that lower interest rates would help by making loans cheaper and spurring investments. But here's the kicker. Low interest rates over a long period are actually a sign that things aren't getting better. What we're seeing right now is a bunch of signs pointing to a stagnant future. Rates are going to stay low, and that's not the lifeline you might expect. It's more like a flashing warning light. The markets have been pricing this in for a while now. Look at the bond market. Yield curves have inverted, meaning long-term interest rates have dipped below short-term rates. This has always been a classic sign that a recession is on the horizon, and we've been seeing this pattern since late 2022. In Europe, it's the same story. By the summer of 2023, the bond market rally was in full swing, signaling that rates would continue to drop and stay down. And what does that mean for the average American? Nothing good. After taking a big dip in 2022, the U.S. Expectations Index actually held steady in 2023. It ended the year with 4 straight months of no major changes and kicked off 2024 pretty much in the same spot. It started in January 2023. While the indices that measure current conditions, investments, and jobs kept bouncing around throughout the year, Americans' feelings about the future economy stayed stuck in a pretty pessimistic place compared to past years. From 2015 to 2021, the Expectations Index only dipped below the 60-point mark once. But since 2022, it's dropped below that line a whopping 20 times. So, why are people feeling so down about the future? Well, for one, Americans are still dealing with higher prices for everyday goods and services, which doesn't exactly inspire hope. Regular folks don't need a PhD to see what's happening. While economists and central bankers keep promising that things will get better, everyday Americans are seeing the opposite. They've been squeezed by rising prices and stagnant wages for years, and now, with unemployment ticking up, they know they're never going to make up the ground they lost. Currently, a whopping 82% of people say their grocery bill is higher now than it was in January 2023. It's not just groceries either. 78% of folks say they're paying more at restaurants, and close to the same number report higher prices for meat, fresh fruits and veggies, and dairy. Electricity bills are rising for 71% of households, and 70% say their general household expenses have gone up as well. It's no wonder people are feeling frustrated. Even though gas prices have started to drop, 56% of people still say they're paying more now than they were at this time last year. though it's better than the 80% who said the same back in August 2023. And 2 out of 5 Americans don't think prices are going down anytime soon, with only 25% expecting any real relief in the next year. It's a weird spot to be in. Unemployment is low, the economy's technically growing, and inflation is finally easing up. But people just aren't feeling it. All those promising numbers don't seem to be making a difference in everyday life. So it's no shock that only 34% of people expect their finances to improve in the next 6 months. That's down 10 points from January 2020. With prices staying stubbornly high, it's hard for most folks to feel like things are really getting better. More than half of Americans now say they need at least $100,000 a year just to feel financially comfortable. Not too long ago, hitting that 6-figure salary was like reaching the pinnacle of financial success. It was the kind of number that meant you were set. You could relax a bit, maybe spend on something you didn't absolutely need, stash away some savings, and finally start to live life on your terms rather than constantly juggling bills. Back in the day, the American dream wasn't about yachts or private jets. It was about having a solid middle-class life. You paid the bills, kept the lights on, fed the family, and still managed to sock away a little something for a rainy day or even retirement. You were doing pretty well if you could do all that. But today, even folks earning well over $100,000 are out here feeling like they're just scraping by. That same 6-figure salary that used to be a symbol of making it is now the number people are just hoping will cover the basics. Now, don't get me wrong. According to a study from the AP, in most parts of the country, you can still technically take care of your basic needs on less than $100,000. We're talking about the essentials here: housing, food, healthcare, transportation, and taxes. Just the bare-bones basics. But here's the kicker. There's no room in that budget for the big things we all think about when we picture a comfortable life. Like saving for emergencies, putting away for retirement, or setting aside money for your kids' college. And let's be real, those are the things that make up the heart of the American dream. The problem is, wages haven't been keeping up with the cost of living for decades now. It's like running a race where the finish line keeps moving further away, and for a lot of families, it feels like they're falling behind. The middle-class lifestyle, the one our parents and grandparents worked for, is becoming harder and harder to attain. What was once a benchmark for financial freedom is now just barely enough to get by, especially in cities like New York or San Francisco. You could be pulling in a 6-figure salary in those places and still feel like you're living paycheck to paycheck, with rent and basic expenses eating up most of your income. Go Banking Rates conducted an analysis and figured out how much a family of 4, 2 adults, 2 kids, would need to live comfortably in every state. They looked at the cost of owning a home, driving a car, feeding the dog, and even making sure there's money for fun and savings. The idea was to capture the essence of the American dream: economic security, the peace of mind that you're not just surviving but actually thriving. You know, maybe doing a little better than your parents, buying a house, and giving your kids a leg up for the future. Here's what the analysis revealed. In every state across the U.S., you would need an annual income of over $100,000 to live comfortably. That's correct. Every state. In 38 of them, however, you would need more than $140,000 just to feel financially secure. The most affordable states include Mississippi, Arkansas, and Kentucky, where the required income ranges from $109,000 to $117,000 to maintain a similar standard of living. On the other hand, if you live in Hawaii, California, or Massachusetts, you'd need more than $240,000 annually to achieve the same lifestyle. To put that in perspective, in 2022, the median family income in these high-cost states fell short by at least $94,000, compared to what is actually needed to comfortably live the American dream. With the 2024 election season just around the corner, the economy is the #1 thing on Americans' minds. How people feel about the economy right now and what they think the future holds will probably be a huge factor in deciding who wins in November. All right, now here's the big question. Do you think the American dream is really dead? I'd love to hear what you think in the comments below. Thanks so much for watching. And hey, if you enjoyed this, don't forget to give it a thumbs up, hit that subscribe button, and make sure you turn on notifications so you never miss out on any new content. Oh, and if you liked this video, you're definitely gonna love the one that's about to pop up on your screen. Go ahead, click it, and I'll catch you over there.